So we're starting a new, what should I call it? We're going to study something new for this month. We're in June. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, the Vimalakirti Sutra. I was going to show you the books. I had the thought while we were sitting. Someone said to me fairly recently, I can't come because I can't read the books. And I thought, you don't have to read the books. I read the books. I just show you the books because I like the books. And I figure maybe somebody, it's like, I just like books. So, and they're here, you never know. 10 years from now, all of a sudden you might have this great urge to study the Vimalakirti Sutra more deeply, and then you'll be able to find them. So the Vimalakirti Sutra, the translation by Burton Watson, is the one that's usually referred to. Thich Nhat Hanh refers to his translation in a little book called The Bodhisattva Path, a commentary on the Vimalakirti, Nridesa, and Ugra Parapracha Sutras. And I'm going to call on Thich Nhat Hanh some, but who I'm primarily going to call on is this little commentary by Joan Sutherland, called The Vimalakirti and the Awakened Heart, a commentary on the sutra that Vimalakirti speaks. It's little, and it's fun to come upon a commentary written by a woman teacher, and I like the way Joan frames things, and she talks about endarkenment, right next to enlightenment. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Joan, I'll call her Joan. I don't think she'd mind. She is in John Tarrant's lineage, which is Rinzai lineage, so it's very koan based. I mean, none of this stuff matters. I'm just saying because it never changed me. This lineage, which is Soto Zen lineage, we use koans sort of like family stories, but they're not the primary vehicle. What we do is we just kind of sit around and breathe, which is kind of nice. And we just finished studying. Are we recording this?
Yes,
yeah,
we are.
Okay. Oh, good, thank you. We just finished a very early sutta, and a commentary by Thich Nhat Hanh, that just talks about breath and body, being awake in the body, studying feelings, being aware of feelings as they arise, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, mind states that arise, then anger, anxiety, all of our stories, and how much anything to become something has to have an other, the realm of dualism. And mindfulness is really big these days. I mean, I'm sorry to be a little irreverent, but it is. And it's wonderful, and Thich Nhat Hanh really brought it forward for all of us. Mahayana sutras, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, are much wilder. So I like both just breathe, and then there are these wild, magical, mysterious stories that it's like, oh, and this is it too? Anyway, I think that's kind of cool, and I'm hoping you will too. So she talks about the Vimalakirti Sutra as being a myth, in that kind of lineage of myth, and how we navigate the dream of this life. What is this life, and how do we live it, and what is the timeless quality that's right in the midst of linear time? she says it's about developing a peaceful and generous heart in a world of sorrows, and how awakening is an inextricable part of the awakening of the world. So as we wake up, everybody wakes up. Thich Nhat Hanh likens it to a play. It's a lot like the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra came after this, but because we had spent some time delving into the Lotus Sutra, I think we have a little bit of a feeling for what it is to enter in this way. It's 2,000 years old. It was composed in central India, written in the latter half of the 2nd century and translated into Chinese by Kumalavira in 406, and that's who Bertrand Russell translates here. Thich Nhat Hanh tells us it was written in a time of literary movement in India, of epics. I think, oh, well, there's still sort of that, like Bollywood, and I mean, there's certain, seems to be kind of stream and tradition of that. And I think we'll talk about this as we go along, but part of it was, how do you make these things accessible to the common people? So of course you do a play. I mean, now you want to make things accessible to people, you do a movie, right? So you do, I mean, it's like Shakespeare. You do it in that kind of a format. So placing it historically 150 years after the Buddha's parinirvana, which means he didn't die, he just looked like he died. He died so that everybody would pay attention. Death kind of gets your attention, right? But he never went anyplace because he was always here, which is the truth of everything. So that's why you call it a parinirvana. There were a lot of different schools that developed. The Buddha's way of teaching was, we're told, is basically he would just meet each person. There was no developed Buddhism because he was the Buddha. There was no system. There was no dogma. It was just like, how do I meet this person? Because Buddha had had the experience of awakening to being fully and completely alive in the most radical way. And he understood that each person is particular and needs something particular. And there is no solid self, and if I keep responding to you out of the sense of who I think you are as a solid self and who you think you are as a solid self, we're probably, within a certain parameter, we're going to be able to help each other. But I used to, when I was a therapist, I'm going to digress here, but I would always have the feeling is, oh, there's a Buddha in the room. You just completely see the Buddha, but you also know there's a confused Buddha here, which you know that you are too, and because you're a confused Buddha, you have some sense of compassion. So there's like this dual reality that isn't really dual, it's just happening simultaneously. You can both talk to the Buddha, and you can also talk to the person who's really hurting and just needs really practical advice. So this is a way to do that. Here's a play. It's about all of you being a Buddha and waking up together. And maybe there's something in particular in here that may tickle your funny bone or whatever. So what happened is, after the Buddha died, some monks, there was a movement that moved further and further away from the world, that didn't. That thought it was just monastics who could do this thing, who could wake up, who could wake up to be a Buddha, and these poor lay people. Sorry, you can come back in another life or whatever. You can certainly you can feed us and you can support our monasteries. And I mean, I'm being a little facetious. But the lay people, it's like anything. There's a movement that goes this way, and then there's a movement that goes the other way. And what a surprise that after a while, some lay people started saying, wait a minute. I think I'd like to be able to practice and wake up just like the monks. but I'm going to do it right in the midst of the world. So I wanted to bring Buddha back into the world. And that became the Mahayana vehicle. And then there's a lot of, and there's some of the polemics in the Vimalakirti Sutra, because Buddhism isn't above anything else, like anything else is. You know, people can poke at each other and think that they're better than the other ones. And so there was a fair amount of, the Mahayanas would look at these people who said only the monastics could do it, and Dogen later then too would say kind of nasty things, actually. So it's good to know nobody escapes. One of the things I like about the difference between the way Joan, I mean, they're both fine and they're both true, is Thich Nhat Hanh. There's a character in here who comes to Vimalakirti, who's one of the most revered disciples, Buddhist disciples, the wisest. And in this sutra, he kind of ends up looking a little bit like a fool, like he asks really dumb questions. And one way to say it is they're just making fun of him. They're just making fun of all these disciples who thought they could do it just by being smart. No, it's not just by being smart. It's about being present and in your body, and I mean, you'll see. But Joan Sutherland says, no, he's asking these questions. She says he's sort of like asking these questions like a bodhisattva, because he's asking the questions that any one of us might ask. And so he's being really helpful in what he's doing. We'll see what I'm talking about as we go on. You'll also see in the Mahayana Sutras and in this sutra, in early Buddhism, there was just one Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. That was the guy. And then, as we know in the Lotus Sutra and in this sutra, there are Buddhas all over the place. There have been timeless Buddhas, before Buddhas, after Buddhas, across time and space. And the good news is that everybody's waking up to be a Buddha. So there is a quality that takes it out of linear time, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then Shakyamuni Buddha, and then he sat under a tree, and then he woke up, and then he taught it to this, and then which is, you know, I mean, we're in linear time, but the heart of these teachings is this world is so much bigger than you can even begin to imagine, and it's happening all the time. That we are simultaneously in linear time and timeless time all the time, which I think is really helpful all the time. And I also think that it's helpful to bring these kinds of things forward in this time, because we can get really locked into this is really awful, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and if that happens, oh my God. I mean, it's not like I don't do that too. I'm talking about politics. But there's also something much bigger going on here. With a kind of mind of faith, which isn't like stupid. You have to do something, please do something. But there's mystery here. And things, we can't, any story we make up about anything is really small. So these sutras sort of are meant to, in a certain way, kind of blow your mind. One of the other names of this sutra is called the Reconciliation of Dualities. Vimalakirti, first of all, is presented as a lay person, but he's also presented as a bodhisattva, a wise bodhisattva. And he's sick. It's like, how could you'd think somebody who was like this sublime bodhisattva is, one, why would he be a lay person? And two, how could he be sick? Because, you know, I mean, that doesn't happen to people who were enlightened, or whatever we think that is. He also was very rich, and he liked to give his money away to the poor. You'll see in a minute that where this sutra is set is it's in a beautiful park, just right outside of Vimalakirti's city, Vaisali, on the banks of the Ganges. It's a beautiful park, but the park was loaned to him by a courtesan, which is often what happens in the sutras. So how is Buddha hanging out in the land that's given to him by a kind of luscious, wayward woman? It makes your mind get bigger in terms of thinking about good and bad and right and wrong. So let me read you a little bit. Is all of this sort of making sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, good. The sutra that Vimalakirti speaks comes from a time of powerful tension within Buddhism between this classical vision, with its focus on attaining freedom from being reborn into a suffering world, and the emerging Mahayana with its commitment to staying in the world to help all beings attain freedom from suffering. The fever had cooled enough that people were starting to formulate the antidote to the antidote, as it were, when not considered. Well, skip that sentence. Hearts shuddered in fear, yearned to open again to something larger than self-preservation. I thought, that sounds like this time, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It's like we're shuddering our hearts, we're closing up in self-preservation. And we know that no matter what happens, sooner or later, there's going to be a swing back where we're going to say, I mean, we could say Obama just not so long ago, full of hope. You know, you just watch us do these swings. The sutra offered a perspective and a practice to support those who wanted to return back to the world. The thread we're following through the sutra is an early version of what we call endarkenment now. Though the sutra never uses that word, in broad strokes, enlightenment is about the brilliant illumination that lifts us out of the suffering world and is the focus of classical Buddhist literature. It's like, let's just create more light here. I mean, please, let's create more light here, but traditionally, religious traditions have a sense of transcendence. Endarkenment is about the radiance of the deep that lets us find home in the world. It's right here. I spent many years being fascinated by the Black Madonna. Same thing. Instead of a transcendent religion, it's right here, and you need both. They complement each other. Endarkenment is the heart that breaks open to life, rests comfortably on the unfathomable mystery of existence, and is easy with uncertainty, complexity, and what courses underground. Enlightenment and endarkenment are both essential to awakening, and Vimalakirti was one of the earliest voices for including the dark, an inclusion that makes awakening whole. And then she goes on to say that when the sutra arrived in China, they were quite comfortable with it because they were steeped in Taoism. And the Taoism puts the origin of everything in the great mysterious and the primordial darkness. I have to take her word for that, out of which the light of the visible world streams. So the sutra offered the yin to complement enlightenment's yang, and came to have a very important influence on Chan, which is Zen, and Koan traditions. Let's acknowledge that the struggle between yearning for relief and yearning to be helpful doesn't just play itself out at a philosophical level. It's in many of us every single day. How do we get relief from suffering, our own suffering, and the suffering of the world? And how do we be helpful and not self-isolate or withdraw into our own suffering? Okay. So we know this a little bit from the Lotus Sutra. Those of you who have studied about that, he's in a park. It's a beautiful park. It's just a normal park. I mean, I've visited some of these places, you know, they're just like parks. But then we're told there's 8,000 bhikkhus and there's 32,000 bodhisattvas there. So you're already, it's like, what in the world are we talking about here? Which says we're completely of this world and we're in another world. So here's where I'm gonna call on Thich Nhat Hanh. So they're all there. And then the son of a householder comes up to the Buddha. The Buddha's sitting there, you know, probably being pretty radiant. And the householder, Ratnakar, came and knelt before the Buddha and said praise and said that we're all there. We're all here we really want your teaching. We bow before you with the wish that you teach us. What are the purifying actions of the bodhisattva? How does a bodhisattva live right in the midst of this really messy, mucky world and remain pure? Not transcendent above, but present. I would say compassionate and kind in this world. What the Buddha says, basically, is if someone wants to build a house or a palace, they have to build it on the earth. It will be impossible to build anything on the space. Let's see, how can I back up? Okay, what the Buddha says is, this is a Buddha field. This is the earth. What you're perceiving is accurate when you look through human eyes, but I want you to know there's also, this is a Buddha field. A Buddha field is what you need in order to tame living beings, to transform bodhisattvas, people into bodhisattvas, to realize that you can benefit living beings, not because you want to live an individual life with an individual liberation, but you can't live not connected to the suffering of living beings. So a bodhisattva has to build a Buddha field in the world of living beings. You can't wait till later. You can't go to heaven. I mean, maybe you can go to heaven. But what a bodhisattva is doing is making this land, which is a pure land, right here on earth, by embodying your deepest intention and Buddha nature and Buddha heart in each moment. Buddha says, I vow to build a Buddha field in the field of life and not in a place where no one lives. You can't go away out of here. The only place you can do it is right here. And it needs skillful means. If a bodhisattva wishes to purify a Buddha field, they should first of all purify their own mind. Once one's own mind is pure, the Buddha field can be pure. So practice. Pay attention to your thoughts. This is exactly what we were doing this past month, is breathe, come back. There's choice about what you're going to do with mind states. There's choice about how you be with your body, in your body. There's choice about how much you want to follow stories of otherings and this and that. But then Shariputra says, well, the Buddha's mind is completely pure. If this is his pure land, then why is it in this Saha world where we're living, why is it so full of impurity? It's like if the Buddha says this is a pure land, why does it look so bad? said, as far as I see it, this world consists of hills, mountains, valleys, thorns, rocks, and mud. How can you call this pure? And then Brahma said, if you see the world like that, it's because of your mind. If your mind was pure, you would automatically see that this world is pure and beautiful. You wouldn't judge any of this as bad. So then the Buddha doesn't know what to do with all of this. And then, you know what the Buddha did? He stretched out his leg and he struck the earth with his toe. Now, is that cool? They're having this whole conversation about Pure Lands and how are you going to reconcile this? And what the Buddha does is he gets down from his seat, digs his toes into the ground, and as soon as he does, the world fills with jewels. And Shariputra is able to see it as a pure land. It's the same world, but it's seen differently. Somehow when the Buddha touches it with his feet, perception changes. Let's see if there's... Shariputra, our Buddha field is always pure and luminous like this. Don't you know moments when you look at the earth and it looks like a jeweled Buddha field? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? Like sometimes you're walking in the woods and a light beam comes through. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you pick up a piece of soil and completely blown away by it. I mean, I think we all know those moments. Sometimes you pick up a carrot and you can't believe that a carrot is a carrot. But you put the same carrot in the compost and it just turns into, well, it turns into something else that's beautiful. But it really does all depend on what your perception is. We have to show the life of living beings with birth, sickness, old age, death, the suffering of attachment, desire, destruction, and separation, so they can wake up and follow the path of awakening, so that we can actually see that there's suffering when we continue to perceive through aversion and wanting things to be different. It was never our intention to say this world is full of impurity and that living beings should all get out of here and get to someplace else. Do not understand us. Our intention is simply to help you wake up in this world of suffering so that you can abide in kindness and compassion. In truth, this Saha world is at the same time our pure land, and you should stay right here. So that's the background, the beginning. We're about to go visit Vimalakirti because the Buddha knows Vimalakirti is sick. And he starts asking people to go and visit him into this impure sickness. And people are afraid to go visit. They'd rather stay pure. But we'll do that on Thursday and we'll continue on. But I think it's an interesting question of how could this world be a pure land? It's a word that's used in Buddhism. It's not called heaven. It's not like it's suddenly going to get transformed into some heavenly realm. It's pure exactly the way it is right now. Which I find actually a really helpful koan myself. Sometimes it does feel like the pure land in a moment of kindness and compassion, you know, a moment of meeting, friendship, or love. But it's an interesting when something's happening when you're sure there's something really wrong and bad and stinky and could this also be the pure land? And what if instead of seeing it as something bad, We saw it as part of, as a manifestation that's here to help us wake up and to see with eyes of wholeness and compassion and wisdom. What if every single thing is here to help us see more clearly and deeply that in this present moment there is both suffering, we don't skip the suffering, but that everything couldn't be anything other than it is because the whole world brought us to this moment. Everything brought it to this exact moment. And your perception of it and my perception of it and your perception of it is we're all perceiving exactly from where we are and responding karmically and reacting. But what if we sat in the Buddha seat and we saw simultaneously there's Buddha here and there's delusion and there's suffering here? What if we could hold the two more simultaneously? Does that make sense in any way? So, does that make sense to you guys? You all must have had moments. So why don't you just turn to the person next to you for a few minutes and just talk about how could this be the Pure Land? What does that mean, that it's